All right, welcome back. Our second lecture here for Unit 1, Endocrine System. We're going to talk a little bit more about what we mean by hormones, and we're also going to mention some other types of chemical messengers that the body uses for communication and control. All right, sorry about that. Okay, so there are three different major categories of chemical messengers that your body produces, which sends signals to other cells of the body to try to control their behaviors. All right, and so in this first unit, we are mainly going to be focusing in on hormones. And so these are chemicals that are produced by endocrine glands, which diffuse into the bloodstream, and they travel throughout your body, carried by the blood. The blood is a system of fluid-filled highways that transport things throughout the body. And then those hormones are able to exit out of your blood vessels, and they get into your tissue fluids where they can have effects on cells that are located all throughout the entire body. So hormones travel in your blood or your lymph fluids. Sometimes that's another name for your tissue fluids that's used at times. Okay, then there are some other chemical messenger classes, and one of these is actually called autocrines or autocrine messengers. And these are kind of weird, but if you think about, all right, so you got a cell here, and there are instances where cells will produce molecules that are called autocrines that are released from the cell, and then they turn around and they have effects, or they send signals to the same cell that produced it. So those are called autocrines. So I know that seems kind of strange, but that's just how things work sometimes. Sometimes cells produce chemical messengers that turn around and act on the same cell that produced them. That seems kind of strange, but that's how things work at times. Those are called autocrines. And then there are chemical messengers that are called paracrines. And all right, so if we got our cell over there and it's secreting some chemicals, if those chemicals acted on some neighboring nearby cells, not necessarily the same cell, but some nearby cells, those are called paracrines. So those are locally acting chemical messengers. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time in this course talking about autocrines. Paracrines will come up occasionally, but in this unit we're mainly going to be focusing in on various hormones produced by endocrine glands. All right, so the hormones of the body actually fall into two main classes in terms of their chemical makeup. And these include amino acid-based hormones. So hopefully you guys remember from Biology 201 that amino acids are one of your major organic building blocks that are used by the cells of the body. And amino acids are the building blocks. If you guys remember, those are the building blocks for proteins. Hang on, my stylus doesn't want to work here. They're the building blocks of proteins in the body. So if you take amino acids and you link them together in chains, you build larger molecules called proteins. So many hormones that are made by the body are derived from amino acids, or they're linked together, amino acids that are linked together in chains to build proteins. So some of our hormones are proteins, and some are called peptides. A peptide is a name for a shorter chain of amino acids. So like a protein, for example, might have 100 or 200 amino acids all linked together in a chain, and then they fold up into a nice little three-dimensional structure. Typically that's what we think of as a protein. A peptide usually refers to a shorter chain of amino acids, like you might have 10 or 12. So you got some terminology that can be used somewhat interchangeably there. All right, and then other hormones that are produced by the body fall into a class called steroids. We've all heard that term before, like bodybuilders are taking steroids illegally to pump themselves up. And yes, that is true. There are steroid-type hormones that stimulate those types of things. But the term steroid actually refers to lipids, certain types of lipid molecules that are derived from this molecule here called cholesterol. So we've all heard about cholesterol before. We're kind of programmed to think about cholesterol as being something that's bad if we have too much of it in our diet. But cholesterol is a special type of lipid. You actually have it in all of your cell membranes. It's absolutely vital for the functions of all of your cells in your body. If you didn't have cholesterol in your body, your cells' membranes would not function properly. And then also, cholesterol is a base molecule from which some types of hormones are made. So this is the chemical structure of cholesterol over here. And incidentally, when you guys see these diagrams of these organic type molecules like this, where they have like a point right there, when you have like a point there, a point there, a point over here, they don't have letters drawn in. It's understood that there's a carbon at that location, and often there are hydrogens bonded to that carbon as well. They just don't always draw all those in because it would make the diagram look more complicated. So that's what cholesterol looks like. And then if you look over here, here's testosterone. Testosterone is the main male sex hormone. It's responsible for traits that we generally associate with males. And if you look at the chemical structure of testosterone, it looks pretty similar to cholesterol. It's a modified type of cholesterol. All right, so hormones that are made by the gonads. And then there are some hormones called adrenocortical hormones that we'll learn about shortly. Those are made by the adrenal glands. They fall into this steroid category as well. In general, let me erase all of this for a second. Whoops. In general, your amino acid-based hormones are hydrophilic, if you remember that term from Biology 201, and your steroid hormones in general are hydrophobic, which means they don't like water. They are fat-loving molecules. They love lipids. They don't like water as much. So that winds up being important for some of their functions as well, as we'll see. All right, so as I mentioned in the first video lecture, hormones are secreted by various endocrine glands. They get into the bloodstream, they travel all throughout the body, they leave the bloodstream, they get into your tissue fluids that bathe the various cells of the body. But they don't act on every cell in the body. They encounter every cell in the body by diffusing through your tissue fluids, but they don't act on every cell in your body. They only act on target cells. And what do we mean by a target cell? A target cell has receptors that very specifically bond to a hormone. So if we're thinking about the hormone growth hormone, for example, or GH, we'll be talking more about that later, there are specific receptors called growth hormone receptors that attach to growth hormone very specifically. It's like a lock and key type fit. And once those two come together, that triggers a response in the cell that makes that receptor. So it's kind of like a hormone is a key and the receptor is at ignition, and those two have got to come together before a target cell is going to respond to that chemical messenger. Now over here you've got a diagram of a cell that is not a target cell. It does not make receptors for that particular hormone, so therefore it's not going to respond to the hormone. Once hormones attach to the receptor, that can set off a chain of events that leads to a response. Okay, and a response is just what is the cell doing that it wasn't doing before the hormone attached to its receptor. That's the response. So the response could be something like the cell divides when it wasn't dividing before, or it starts producing proteins that it wasn't making before. It might break something down that it wasn't breaking down before. So we'll see many different examples of responses that can be made to various hormones. Yeah, and here are some more on this next slide here, some different example responses. Different hormones trigger different responses in different target cells. That's something important to keep in mind. And a lot of this will make more sense as we go through particular hormones and see specific examples about what they do. So one thing that hormones can do is alter plasma membrane permeability or membrane potential. Remember that from when you studied the muscular and the nervous systems in Biology 201. So altering plasma membrane permeability, maybe the response to the hormone is that now the cell lets particular ions or nutrients into the cell that it wasn't allowing into the cell before. Sometimes hormones trigger certain enzymes or other types of proteins to be made. If you guys remember, proteins are the chemical workhorses of your cells. They have lots of different roles in your body. Activates or deactivates enzymes. Enzymes are proteins themselves. They're proteins that carry out your chemical reactions. So if you make particular enzymes, you're going to be able to do certain chemical reactions. If you don't make those enzymes, or if they're deactivated, you're no longer going to be able to carry out the chemical reactions that those enzymes are designed to perform. Hormones can also trigger substances to be secreted. Sometimes hormones actually trigger other hormones to be secreted. We'll see several examples of those. Another thing, as I mentioned, stimulating mitosis, cell division. Sometimes cells are not dividing, but when they receive signals from hormones, those hormones trigger those cells to divide. Good example of that would be growth hormone. Growth hormone triggers growth. If you have growth, you've got to produce more cells. All right, so moving on, we're going to be seeing lots of different examples of hormones made by the endocrine system and the effects they have on the body. So one of the things you want to do while you're studying, and it wouldn't hurt to make a table or an outline and do this for each endocrine gland and hormone that we talk about. When you're learning about particular hormones, start learning what endocrine gland makes the hormone. What stimulates the hormone's secretion? So in Biology 201, you learned about homeostasis, negative feedback control, where the levels of something go up, and the body makes responses to turn it back down. And then once it gets a little bit too low, the body makes responses to cause the levels to go back up. So as we're going to see, hormone levels are often maintained through a negative feedback type pattern. So what is it that actually triggers the hormone to be made? How is its production controlled? That gets into the negative feedback control or negative feedback pathways for particular hormones. So you want to be sure you're outlining that, studying those types of things for the hormones that we talk about those things with regard to. What are the targets of the hormone? Again, hormones don't act on every cell in the body. They only act on ones that have receptors for the hormone. What are the responses? What do the target cells do? So it could be, or what are the effects on the body? Could be that you retain more water in the body. Could be your calcium levels in your body fluids go up or go down. It could be your glucose levels in your bloodstream go up or go down. Those are the responses, the effects of the hormone. And then also we'll talk a lot about, probably the most interesting aspect of the endocrine system is the disorders. There are a number of different disorders or diseases that are caused by overproduction of particular hormones or underproduction of particular hormones, or a lack of response to particular hormones. That can lead to disorders as well. Good examples, type 2 diabetes. That's due to a lack of response to the hormone insulin, which we'll be talking about later toward the end of this particular unit. We'll hear more about diabetes. Okay, so that's going to conclude this particular video lecture. On the next one, I'm going to talk a little bit more about, all right, so a hormone binds to its receptor. How does that cause a response in the target cell. So that'll be the topic for the third video lecture for Unit 1.